Alrighty, my little French fries. Today we are talking about absolute value. Miss Rodriguez, what is absolute value? Never heard of that. All right, well, let's go ahead and write our definition. The absolute value of a number is the distance, sorry, that's a C, between the number, oh my goodness, having a writing issue today, the number and 0, that's a 0. I put a line through it that shows you it's a 0 on the number line. Okay, so what does that mean? I think we talked about the distance from 0 the other day when we were ordering and comparing numbers on a number line. And I said, remember, distance from 0 is going to be important. So today's where you see why it's important, okay? So first of all, an important thing you need to know, the absolute value. I really am having a problem writing today. I'm sorry, guys. The absolute value of a number, we're going to say A is our number, is written as okay. Now that might look a little crazy, but do you see how A represents a number? And the 2 bars on either side of the number, that means the absolute value of. So the 2 bars equals absolute value of. Okay, so when we see the 2 bars on either side of a number, you say the absolute value of A, or if there was a 4 in between those 2 bars, the absolute value of 4. Okay, so that's the mathematical symbol for absolute value. And in case you guys didn't know, in order to do a straight up and down bar, I'm going to show you my keyboard. The straight up and down bar is, remember, this is called a backslash right here. This is called a forward slash. And so you would hit shift and forward slash to get this bar symbol right here. So when you're doing your work, you have to be very careful. You need to put one in front of a number and one after a number if you have to say the absolute value of. Okay? So you have it on your keyboard and you can write it. When you're writing it, it's going to be very important that you remember to not write it the same size as your numbers. You have to write it bigger, longer than your numbers. For instance, if I wrote it like this, first of all, let me write the bars larger than the numbers. Because if I write it like this, bar to bar, what does that look like? It looks like 121, doesn't it? But if I write it like this, bar to bar, you know, you might accidentally first say 121, but then you're going to look at it and you're going to say, wait a second, something looks wonky there. Oh yeah, that's absolute value. So you need to make sure that your numbers are smaller than your bars. Okay, so your bars should be longer from top to bottom than your numbers. All right, because you can easily get confused with this mathematics symbol. Okay, so let's take a look at what I mean on a number line. Because I said that the absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and 0 on the number line. So we're going to draw a number line here. Okay, I'm going to put 0 in the middle. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Okay, so now if I want to find the absolute value of negative 2 and the absolute value of 2, okay, first I'm going to graph negative 2. There's negative 2. And then I'm going to count its distance from 0. So I'm going to go from 0, 1, 2. So that means the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. Remember, that's how we read this. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. All right. Now I'm going to graph 2, the absolute value of 2. So graph 2. Here's 2. And now I'm going to count how many spaces it is from 0. 1, 2. 2. So the absolute value of 2 is 2. So in case you haven't figured this part out, the absolute value is always a positive number. Because we're counting. From 0. Okay, so the absolute value is always a positive number because we're counting from 0. All right, so now let's take a look at an example. So example 1. Find the absolute value of 7. Remember, we're finding the absolute value of 7. The bars mean say the absolute value of 7. Okay, so if we're finding the absolute value of 7 and I draw a number line, well, I'm only plotting one number and it's going to be 7. So I'm going to put the 0 all the way here because I know 7 is always to the right of 0 because it's a positive number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And remember, that could go on and on and on and on. Okay. So I'm going to graph 7. And count my places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the absolute value of 7 is 7. Okay, let's do example number 2. the absolute value of -2 1/2. Remember, make those bars bigger than your numbers. All right, so once again, I'm going to need a number line. -2 1/2. I know that that is to the left of my 0 because it's negative, so I can put my 0 all the way over here. And then if I count, I can count -1, -2, -3. And remember, halfway from -0 to -1 is -1 1/2. Oh my gosh, not -1 1/2. -1/2. Sorry. Halfway between -1 and -2 is -1 1/2. And halfway between -2 and -3 is -2 1/2. Okay, so plot my number. Remember, we're counting whole numbers, so we go, well, 1, 2 1/2. So the absolute value of -2 1/2 is 2 1/2. Notice so far, every single time I've shown you what the absolute value is, they're always positive. All right, now we're going to compare. So example 3. Compare 2 and the absolute value of -5. And then for a second one, we're going to compare the absolute value of -4 and the absolute value of 4. Okay, so let's start with this first one. First, you have to find the absolute value of 2. So remember on that, you can use any number line that you've already drawn. That's fine. But 2, the distance from 0 you can count is 1, 2. So this one, hold on. When you're comparing, just find the absolute value for both numbers, even if it doesn't say the absolute value for 2. So, the absolute value of 2 equals 2, and the absolute value of -5 equals 5, because count from 0. 0 to -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. That's 5 places. So 2 is less than, notice I'm using my numbers from my original question. Don't use these numbers. Use these numbers when you're writing it out. 2 is less than the absolute value of -5. Right? Because the absolute value of -5 is 5, and 2 is less than 5. Okay, so let's do this one now. Compare -4, the absolute value of -4 and the absolute value of 4. Well, the absolute value of -4 is 4, because if you count from 0, you get -1, -2, -3, -4. That's 4 places. And if you do the absolute value of 4, it's also 4. Because if you count from 0, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So you get 4. so the absolute value of -4 is equal to the absolute value of 4. So just so that you remember opposites, they have the equal distance from, we did the opposites in our other lessons. When you have opposites, they're the equal distance from 0, so they have the same absolute value. So any positive number will have the same absolute value as its opposite negative number. Okay? Okay, next example. Example 4. Order the values from least to greatest. All right, here are my values. My first value is the absolute value of -5, comma, space, 3, comma, space, the absolute value of 2, comma, space, negative absolute value of 3, and last is comma, negative absolute value of -4. That looks a little confusing, right? Okay, so first things first, I'm going to find the absolute value of each of these numbers. So the absolute value of -5 is 5, because starting at 0, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The absolute value of 3 is 3, because starting at 0, I go 1, 2, 3. The absolute value of 2, starting at 0, I go 1, 2. Okay, for this guy, I find the absolute value of 3. 1, 2, 3. And I keep the negative that's in front of it. Okay, and then for this guy, I find the absolute value of -4 from 0 to -4 is -1, -2, -3, -4. So that's 4. And again, I'm going to keep the negative in front of it. Okay, so remember we were supposed to order, right? Order. Let's use some blue. Order. You have to put these in order. But we don't use these. Don't use these to put in order. Use these. So these helped us put the numbers in order, but we're going to put these in order. Okay, the original numbers they gave us. So in order to do that, we're going to look at these numbers and say, okay, which one is the lowest? The lowest is, let me use a different color again. The lowest is this. So my lowest number is -4. Sorry, negative absolute value of -4. Now my second lowest number is this guy, which, remember, we're using this. Negative absolute value of 3, comma, space. Remember, you separate every integer with a comma and a space. Okay, next one is this guy. The absolute value of 2. Notice I'm not writing 2, -3, and -4. I'm writing the original number. I just use the absolute values to put them in order. Comma, space. My next lowest number is 3. So 3, comma, space, and my last number is this guy, which is absolute value of -5. Okay, no period at the end. Don't think that because we use commas, we need periods. All right, so remember, you don't use your absolute values. You use the list that you were originally given to put in order. Okay. We're going to try one more. Same thing. We're ordering order least to greatest. Okay? -18, comma, space, absolute value of 30, comma, space. -19, comma, space. Negative absolute value of -22, comma, space. -20, comma, space, and absolute value of -18. All right, it's helpful if you keep them right underneath your numbers when you're finding the absolute values. So the absolute value of 18 is 18. I'm sorry, -18 is 18. The absolute value of 30 is 30. The absolute value of -19 is 19, because if you counted from 0 to -19, you would hit 19 numbers. Okay, the absolute value of -22 is 22, but we have to keep that negative right there, the extra negative. Okay, the absolute value of -20 is 20. The absolute value of -18 is 18. Okay, so now we're going to put them in order from least to greatest. Remember, start with your negatives, the highest negative number first. So the correct answer is -22. I'm sorry, don't use the -22. It's negative the absolute value of -22, comma. And if it helps you, put a small cross through so that you know that you did that one already. Now I'm looking for any other negatives. None. So now I can just count in order, can I? Let's see. Well, I can do -18. And if I look down here, this one is also right there, so it would also be the absolute value of -18. Nice light line. Don't cross it all through so that you can't go back and fix your work. Okay, after 18, I've got 19, which is -19. After 19, I've got 20, which is -20. And after that, I've got 30, which is the absolute value of 30. So notice I used these guys on the bottom to help me order, but these are the numbers that I wrote. Alrighty guys, I know this is a little confusing, just getting used to using those bars to say the absolute value of, but I think you guys can get it. It's pretty straightforward. So go ahead and do today's practice, and I will see you for our next lesson.